Good morning. Thank you and welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. Today we launched our annual Diversity and Inclusion Workshop. However, this year we're changing it to the Diversity and Inclusion Author Series, where we will highlight authors from across the country as well as our local authors. Before we get started, I'd like to thank and recognize some of our sponsors. Thank you to Community American Credit Union, Evergy, and Hallmark. We'd also like to thank the Blue Springs Chamber and the Independence Chamber for joining us in this workshop series. We also like to thank our presenting sponsor, Commerce Bank. And here to talk on behalf of Commerce Bank is Brandon Ingram, Director of Talent Acquisition. Brandon?
Thank you, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the KC Chamber's 2022 Diversity and Inclusion Workshop Series. We're so glad to have you join us on this chilly and what appears to be a snowy Tuesday. As Greg mentioned, I'm Brendan Ingram, Director of Talent Acquisition for Commerce Bank. So as someone who's deeply involved in forming our bank's recruitment and retention strategies, very interested in hearing from today's speaker, Jeff Korzenik. In his day job, Jeff serves as the Chief Investment Strategist for Fifth Third Bank from his home base in Tampa, Florida. He is also a thought leader and author who's developed a national audience for his economic and public policy commentary. But what interests me most about Jeff, however, is the group of people he's here to discuss with us today, and that is specifically job seekers with a criminal record. So numbering in the millions nationwide and long marginalized in the workplace, this special population is also the subject of Jeff's book, Untapped Talent. In it, he makes a case for the business community to expand its hiring pool to include people seeking that fresh start. He also outlines the best practices of second chance employers that are glad they did so. All are topics of interest to us all, especially as we grapple with labor shortages and seek to build a more diverse and inclusive workforce. We are also reminded, obviously, that those with criminal records aren't the only population that can be marginalized in the workplace. People of color, along with other underrepresented groups, have also carried extra baggage that has historically held them back as they sought employment and advancement opportunities. Learning more about those in need of a second chance, I think, should add to our understanding of the obstacles our DEI programs are seeking to overcome every day, and expanding and leveling the playing field for all can be a great step forward. With that, let's give a warm welcome to our speaker, Jeff Korzenik. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you so much, and I'm very grateful to Commerce Bank for the sponsorship and for the Kansas City Chamber and the affiliated chambers for this opportunity to share my work. So I'm going to speak for maybe about a half hour and share some of the research and the message that I've been bringing to the business community. Started this journey back in 2013. It started with identifying the problems that were plaguing our resources. And I was fortunate enough to visit and find people in the business community who had not only identified the problem, but that had come up with the solution and how to hire people with criminal records and other marginalized backgrounds in a way that offers them gainful employment, lifetime employment, career opportunities, but also works for the business. And it's got to be a business case. It's got to stand alone as a business case, or we could never scale this to the problem we have in American society. So let me start out. I'm going to share my screen. And what would an economist be without a couple of slides and charts to go along? I know not everyone is a chart and graph math person, so bear with me because I think there's an important message for all of us here. Let me start out by talking about why this is of such importance to the business community. I think we're starting to feel this today. This workforce shortage is simply not going away. And this is something that is an existential threat to the business community. If you don't have enough workers, you can't service your existing customers, you can't grow your business. And of course, if your rivals figure this out, you're going to lose in our competitive business environment. This is something that we are faced with on sort of a gut level. How many times have you been to a restaurant where not all the tables are open, or seen reduced levels of service or a longer wait time? But it's also something that can be seen in the financial statements of businesses. They're forced, because of the labor shortage, to pay higher and higher wages. That's fine if you can grow your business to support those wages. But if you're forced to pay higher wages just to keep the workforce, or try to keep the workforce you can, and can't find the people to grow your business, ultimately that's going to crush our ability to grow, not just at a company level, but also at the national economic level. One of the truisms, and there are very few truisms in economics, but one that is understood and kind of makes common sense, the potential growth of our economy, like any economy, is ultimately based on two things and two things alone. How fast can you grow your workforce, and how fast can you grow the productivity of your workforce? Today, because of our workforce challenge growth, the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan part of the US government, estimates that the long-term growth rate of the US economy is only 1.7% GDP growth a year. That is paltry growth. That's half of what many of us who grew up in, say, the 80s and 90s business environment are used to. And that's not the kind of growth we want as a society. We want a much faster growth economy. And it boils down to that the challenge today is primarily because of workforce growth. So can we solve this issue is really the heart of my research and where I think the business community needs to go. And it's a daunting challenge. The challenge really boils down to something that we can't change, namely that we stopped having enough babies 20 and 30 years ago. People who study these things, demographers, use the measurement of fertility rate to understand what's going on and what the future holds. The fertility rate is the number of children a woman will have over her childbearing years, over her lifetime. Just to replace your population, not to grow it. Remember, you need to grow your workforce in order to grow your economy, but not even to grow it. Just to replace your population, you need a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman. So where does that come from? Well, you need a mother and a father, obviously, at least biologically. And so that means you need to replace the mother and father. That's 2. And then that 0.1 is a reflection that, of course, there's tragically infant mortality, early mortality. So you do need to have more than 2 just to stay even. That replacement rate for our population is represented on this chart by that orange horizontal line. That's that 2.1 child replacement rate. And you can see on the left-hand side, going back to the 1950s, 1960, when this chart starts, with the baby boom growth, the baby boom generation was created by lots of fertility. We have very large families on average, particularly compared to today. And then in the 70s, that started to fall, 70s and 80s. And then as the economy got more robust, people gained confidence, and you saw kind of a return, and we hovered around replacement rate. But roughly since 2007, 2008, we've fallen below replacement rate. And depending on how you have your screen set up, you might not be able to see the far right-hand side of that fertility line. But we are at levels that we've never seen, low levels of fertility that we've never seen in post-World War II America. And there is some thought that we were in the worst of the Great Depression. We got down to these levels, but then recovered. It's hard to see a recovery here. Not only are we below our replacement rate of our population, we are at such a low level of fertility that our traditional remedy, immigration, probably isn't enough, and certainly isn't enough under current immigration laws. And even immigration laws, should there be the political will to fix them, might not be enough, because this is not just happening in the United States. It's happening in just about every developed country of the world, and many of the major emerging markets like China and Brazil, elsewhere, have fertility rates below their replacement rate of population. So this is going to be a big, big challenge for all of us ahead. So this challenge, normally things with demographics happen very gradually. What's different this time around is how suddenly a gradual shortage became a very immediate shortage. And the pandemic played a huge role here. I think the number one reason the pandemic accelerated this looming problem was because of the early retirement of baby boomers. The St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, they have their own research department. They came out with a study in the fall that estimated that 2.4 million American workers retired early during the pandemic. It's easy to see why. If you lost your job and you're older, the unfortunate truth is it's much harder to get back in, and so people just decided to retire early. Older Americans, as we all know, were more vulnerable to COVID from a health reason, so that was another incentive. And now people have been out for so long that if they left the workforce and they're older, it's a lot harder to even want to go back in. So some of these 2.4 million retirees will unretire, but the vast majority, I would think, will stay out of the workforce and retire permanently. This is a huge loss. To put numbers on it, if you lose 2.4 million workers, well, first of all, the baby boomers were expected to retire, but they were expected to retire at a rate of about 10,000 workers each day for the next decade. Instead of a lot of that happened in a matter of months or within the course of about a year or 2 years. So it was something that was going to happen, but it was the suddenness. 2.4 million workers is the loss of a year's worth of new workers, right? Normally we grow our economy by adding 2.5 million workers. Not only to grow our economy do we have to do that, but we have to make up now for this shortfall of workers. And often when you lose the older workers, you're losing not just a worker, but a whole a reservoir of knowledge. These are some of your most experienced employees, and in particular circles, say manufacturing. This kind of knowledge is being lost is a great loss, this experiential knowledge. So this is a real challenge for the economy that was accelerated by the pandemic. But the pandemic has done other damage to our workforce. Economists talk of this concept of reallocation friction. That's where you have a resource and a need for the resource, but somehow the two aren't meeting. Here's where that's present in the American labor force today. The US government estimates that there are nearly 11 million job openings in the US, and there are also 6.3 million job seekers. How can it be that we have 11 million openings, 6 million job seekers, and they're not meeting? Well, this is where this concept of reallocation friction comes in. The pandemic changed in so many ways how we shop, how we order food, where we order food, where we work, where we commute, how we commute. All of these things are types of trends that may have started prior to the pandemic, but got accelerated earlier. So for instance, I'm going to Chicago tomorrow. The city is having a great challenge in getting people to go back to that downtown, the loop, the downtown financial district, the downtown office buildings. So a lot of those are sitting, if not completely empty, at least used less than half they were prior to the pandemic. That's meant that all the stores that supported those office workers, shoe shines, bookstores, restaurants, many of those are closed. You don't have the same need for workers who supported the infrastructure of those buildings. And so, yes, it is true that some of these jobs are moving elsewhere. Food delivery now probably has greater needs than some traditional restaurants would have, or there's a move to suburban spaces from downtown spaces. But the challenge is that people who held these jobs further may not have transportation to the new jobs, may not have the new skill sets that are required, or any host of barriers. So this is reallocation friction. It is a bad thing for trying to grow your workforce in the economy. There is a body of evidence that suggests that the augmented unemployment benefits also played a role. If you think about this nature of reallocation friction, to stay employed or to regain a job, I'm going to have to go into another field or take less pay or commute to the suburbs or commute or move to somewhere else in the country where there are more job openings. All of those things are, frankly, from the standpoint of the job seeker, pretty unhappy and unpleasant decisions. It is, no one likes to make an unpleasant decision. There is a natural tendency, if you don't have to make a tough decision or you want to wait it out and see what the outcomes are, having augmented unemployment benefits did allow people to wait and for a time. And so that's not necessarily bad, that's human nature and understandable, but it also does some harm in that the longer people are out of work, the harder it is to get back into the workforce. So that's also played a role here, as has just natural demographics. We saw early on in the pandemic, particularly in the spring of 2020, we lost a lot of women, particularly millennial women, who left the workforce because their children couldn't attend school physically, and the parents felt that one parent had to stay home and monitor the children who were doing online learning. This wasn't exclusively women, but statistically it is disproportionately women. And I think there's just a natural tendency for some two-income households to become one-income households when they have children. And again, it's not always the woman who leaves the workforce. It's increasingly, we're seeing more trends towards men doing it, but it's still proportionally higher women. That will be a challenge going forward. There's been some surveys of people who have dropped out of the workforce and are asked, why are you staying out? And the number one answer has been, because I have a working spouse. And so this is also going to be a challenge for employers trying to look elsewhere. And then we have to talk about the costs of social ills upon our workforce. And this is something that we saw very clearly after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. We saw that we had lost people from the labor force. When you start to ask the question, as I did, on why are they out of the labor force and look more deeply, I came to the conclusion, and this was not accepted at the time, or not widely accepted, but I came to the conclusion that it was social ills. It was long-term unemployment, because we had slow job recovery after 2009, and the longer people are out of the workforce, the more they tend to drop out eventually. It was quite horribly the opioid epidemic, not just the number of overdose deaths that you hear about, and the last year was a record number of overdose deaths, but it's more than that. It's the people who use opioids for non-medicinal purposes, estimated at more than 10 million people. Now, many of those are in the workforce, of course, but it does preclude you from employment in fields like transportation and manufacturing, which are great career pathways, but for workplace safety, maybe doing drug testing as part of the candidate selection process or as part of workplace safety. And so the opioid epidemic has absolutely played a huge role in keeping people from the workforce. And then the one that is really the focus for my work, and of course these things are all interrelated, is criminal justice involvement. And this is one where I think we in the business community have an enormous opportunity to fix this and to bring people who are justice impacted back in the workforce, and to help ourselves and our national growth and our companies by doing this. Ultimately, the solution is, if you can't go back and fix how many babies we were having 20 or 25 years ago, what you can fix is how good a job we're doing at finding people, bringing them in off the sidelines and bringing them into the workforce. Economists have a measurement for that called the labor force participation rate. What percentage of your adult population, technically your civilian, non-institutionalized adult population, is in the workforce? In the workforce means that you're actively employed or you're actively seeking employment. This chart goes back to 1948. I want to bring your attention first to the center part of this chart, where we saw rising workforce participation, particularly in the 1980s and the 1990s. That's a major reason why we had such growth rates, great growth rates in the US economy. Yes, we had the baby boomers entering the working age, and that was part of this growth rate. But we also had, quite critically, more opportunities for women to enter the workforce. That was kind of the secret sauce of rising labor force participation rate, and one of the major reasons we had such good growth in those decades. But by 2000s, this had largely tapped out. We started to lose people because the baby boomers, the oldest among the baby boomers, were leaving the workforce, and then about half of the decline that you see on the right-hand side there was due to these social ills: opioid epidemic, and incarceration, recidivism cycles. This was a real problem for U.S. labor force participation rates, and hence a problem for U.S. growth. And then you can see on the far right-hand side that deep dip of the pandemic cost us a lot there, and we are starting to recover from it. We can recover quite a bit if we can focus on bringing marginalized workers back into the workforce in ways that foster productive employment and long-term employment. We help ourselves in the business community by doing this, and we help foster faster growth rates in the US economy. We have lost people through the pandemic. Some we will not be able to get back, those really older workers, but some we can get back, and many we can look into the sidelines today and find those who have been overlooked, have not been given first chances, let alone second chances, and find ways to bring them into the workforce. And the biggest opportunity, in my view, is people who have been sidelined, either not in the workforce, they've given up, either unemployed, that means looking for a job and not finding a job, or quite typically also underemployed. That means that they have a job, they're working, they get a paycheck, but they don't have the kind of labor mobility the rest of us have to move on to different companies and different jobs and have greater career opportunities. So all of these mean we have a huge opportunity. How big is the opportunity? Well, I talked about losing, how costly it was for us to lose the early retirements, the baby boomers, 2 million workers. Look how many people are out there with opportunities. The number I tend to focus on the most is 19, that is in red there. There are 19 million Americans have a felony conviction. It's a staggering number. And this is a huge pool. I am not saying, and it's really important to stress this to businesses, I am not saying that every single person with a felony conviction is going to be a good fit for you or your company. I believe many are unemployable for all sorts of reasons. Some have aged out of the workforce. But among the 19 million, there are millions, absolutely millions, who could be employed or employed better than they are today. And this has to be viewed as not the traditional view of people with criminal records as some kind of burden, but they should be viewed as a resource. I do want to mention, you'll hear the number 70 million quite a bit. And that's that far right column there. That's the number of people who have had some kind of justice involvement, that have a arrest record or a tax lien or something like that. Some of those are barriers to employment for sure, but the hardest barrier, of course, is having a felony conviction. But even the misdemeanors or even arrests without being guilty can impact your ability to get jobs, particularly in some highly regulated industries. So there's so much opportunity here, but you have to do it in the right way in order to capitalize on this opportunity. There's some really interesting statistics that came out that just reinforces this point. There's a new study from the RAND Corporation, the global policy think tank, that did a great job identifying just how much criminal justice involvement and unemployment are intertwined. In the past, the number that's been used, and it is an accurate number, I believe, is that among people with a felony who have been formerly incarcerated, which is not everyone with a conviction, but among those who are formerly incarcerated, the unemployment rate of those still looking is thought to be 27%. Those coming out of incarceration, it's thought that the unemployment rate is north of 50% in that first year of coming home. So there's huge opportunity here, as long as we understand this as an opportunity. But the RAND Corporation did another study. They looked at who is unemployed today and to what degree has criminal justice involvement been part of their life. And focusing on young men, those under age 35, they found that 64% of unemployed young men had an arrest record by age 35, and 46% of them had a conviction record. So clearly, justice involvement is playing a role in people not being able to gain employment, even in this tight labor market. There's also, I think we all understand in our gut that the burdens of the justice system have not fallen equally in all communities. There's a University of Georgia study completed in 2010 that I think is the most comprehensive study of this. They found that 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction. That's a horrendous burden on communities. And it also impacts the ability of the transmission of work values. How do you know how to work? How do you know how to handle challenges in the workforce? All of these things that require a level of mentoring and are all challenged when you have this cycle of lack of employment because of a criminal record. It becomes intergenerational. And we know things like that one of the strongest indicators of whether a child will ultimately go to prison is whether they had a parent who went to prison. These are terrible intergenerational burdens on our American communities, and we need to find ways to break them. But again, it has to be a business case. And I thought the author of the RAND study, the lead author, had some good points. He said he puts the burden where I believe it belongs, on the employer. Employers need to understand that one big reason they cannot find the workers they need is too often they exclude those who have had involvement with the criminal justice system. That's the direct quote. So it's not necessarily that there's a problem with people with justice involvement. The problem often lies within our hiring and talent acquisition process. And we can help ourselves in the business community by finding ways to fix that talent acquisition process. Why should you do this talent pool? Well, first of all, it's just enormous. 19 million Americans. Again, I don't believe that every one of those 19 million is a viable employee, but if you start with a pool of 19 million, I believe you can find millions who are. It also means that not only do you have this broad talent pool, it's actually pretty deep. You have, I've met people with PhDs who have justice involvement, law degrees, medical degrees. All of these things may have some issues in where they can be employed and whether they can go back to their prior careers. Very often, particularly with white collar criminals, you can't, but there's still opportunities to tap those talents. It is also true when, again, you go back to that statistic, 1 in 3 Black men in America have a felony conviction. It's hard to see that you can have an effective diversity initiative if you have a hiring process in your company that tends to weigh the scales against people with criminal records. When you have 70 million people who have had some kind of involvement in the justice system, you probably want employees who are familiar with that, because we're a consumer-oriented economy and you want that diversity of life experience so people understand the marketplace in the most full way possible. But more than that, when you find people who are ready to turn their life around, who've made mistakes, yes, in the past, paid their dues, and want to re-enter society and rebuild their lives, they tend to be very highly engaged employees. And if you give them the tools to succeed, they will be not just highly engaged, but also very loyal and very successful and profitable employees. People who care about their jobs, who appreciate the opportunity they've been given and stay with you. That tends to be a recipe for profitability for companies. At a minimum, you're reducing turnover costs, but also you create people who are simply more productive, and that works well. Now that's at the company level. Obviously, if we can scale this up, as I believe we can in the American business community, we not only get a faster growth, but we get more prosperous communities and more stable families. And of course, given that employment is foundational to rehabilitation, you also lower rates of recidivism and you generate more public safety. As an economist, I'm used to dealing in trade-offs. Economics is known as the dismal science, because you're always talking about, for every win you talk about, you also have to talk about a loss. Every gain also has a setback. This is one of those very few areas where we really have win-win situations. We make our economy better. We make our societies safer. This is a really important objective to pursue. But it's also important to understand that it has to be pursued the right way. You who are listening today, and many businesses, have had a bad experience with this. If you approach this, and this is my fear, companies today are becoming more open to hiring people with criminal records, but they think of it as lowering their standards. If you don't go looking for talent, you won't find it. The approach, and so many businesses have tried this in the past, they viewed it as lowering their standards, and they didn't have a lot of success. This talent pool has to be approached the way you would any other talent pool. You need a selection process to decide who would be a good fit, and then you need a support process of accommodations and things like that that allow people to not just stay employed, that's part of it, but also to thrive and be really good employees. The concept of this model is pretty simple. Find the people who are a good fit, give them the tools to thrive. That's just a basic talent acquisition model. It will work say, with the graduates of Harvard Business School. It's just that those graduates, there are 19 million of those graduates, and they've been picked over. The reason this works so well for companies that adopt this is that this is a talent pool that has been overlooked by competitors. And so you can really find some great employees. I think all of us can relate in human nature when we've fallen down and been less than our best selves. We often pick ourselves up and try to redouble our efforts to prove that we are more than our worst moments. It's true of this talent pool as well. If you find those people who are ready for that commitment, and then again, critically give them the tools to thrive. And that can be things as basic as a flex schedule to meet with a parole officer. These are not necessarily costly investments, but they are worthwhile investments. It's important to understand all the barriers that have kept us from this, and there are things that we can do to break those down. There's professional licensing barriers. Many people with felony convictions can't get professional licenses or trade licenses. There's, in fact, a number of these hard regulatory barriers that cover where people with criminal convictions can live, where they can work, what fields they can work in. These are called collateral consequences. It is estimated that when you add up all the regulatory rules that govern federal policy, state policy, and in some cases, even city policies, that there are 44,000 such collateral consequences. That's an awful lot of barriers. And then there are objections as well that focus on safety liability. Will they be good employees, and does it have negative reputation consequences? All of these are things that can be addressed, should be addressed, and should be listened to respectfully. And these are issues, but it's important to recognize that when you start with a pool of 19 million or larger, you can find some really great talents. It's just a matter of, do you have a process to find who are the good employees, or who can be made good and successful employees from that? One of the barriers, though, to doing this is that we've set up HR and talent acquisition professionals with a very unfair playing field. Essentially, for many HR professionals, this is viewed as a HR risk, particularly those who have to examine some of these records and make the final decision. This is something that is unfair. Many HR professionals know that if they take a chance on someone with a criminal record and it works out, that'll be viewed as just doing their job. If, on the other hand, they take a chance and someone doesn't work out, it can boomerang as a career issue. Who okayed hiring that person? And that is one of the biggest barriers is built into the process of unfair. So this requires leadership at the top of companies. I do believe every professional in the talent acquisition and talent development chain can play a role in driving this forward, but it also needs clear cover from the top of the house in a company executive management. Sometimes this takes the form of quotas. No one likes living under quotas, but sometimes it starts that way. I in my book talk about the experience of Jeff Brown. Jeff is one of the best second chance employers of people with criminal records in the country. He has about 500 second chance hires out of his 2,500 person workforce. He runs a grocery chain in the Philadelphia area. And Jeff started just a couple of years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago now, by challenging his managers to just hire 6 people with criminal records. That's it, 6. And he argued successfully to his managers that if we cannot find 6 people with criminal records who could be great employees, the problem is not the population of Philadelphia. The problem is with our management team. And his managers got the message. They hired their 6. It worked out so well that they've continued hiring to now they're at this 500. They've started a workforce development program, a nonprofit that supports not only hiring for their company, but even hiring for their competitors. And they're making the city of Philadelphia a better place because of this. But it basically is a business proposition. And Jeff Brown, in this case, made it clear to his hiring managers that you can make mistakes, but you've got to reach and try. And in fact, and that's really critical to get that sort of executive leadership sponsorship. There are also changes that can be made in the talent acquisition and particularly the review process. Where did you post a job? So many job applicants with criminal records have gotten so discouraged, they don't look at the Indeed.coms or the Monster.coms. They've turned to specialized websites like honestjobs.co or 70millionjobs.com, which are job posting boards for the justice impacted community. Just posting a job opening there is a signal that you will give fair consideration to people with criminal records. The review process is critical. You need either an executive to be part of that decision making who's committed to second chance hiring, or you need a line of business manager who's feeling the pain of the labor shortage. You have to help balance out those career disincentives that do exist for some HR professionals in taking these kinds of risks. And we've seen all sorts of models that work, but the key is providing some kind of balance. Maybe it's having a committee approach where someone's responsibility is to act as an advocate, arguing why you should hire from this population, as opposed to arguing why we should avoid doing that. So all of these things work. It's just important to know that they need to be done. Even for those companies that aren't ready to take the step, there are things that you can do today. One is to recognize that there are low-risk hires. And so in your background checks, how many years do you go back? Do you really care if someone had a conviction 20 years ago? Why should you care? All of these are part of recognizing that someone who has rebuilt their life and has been a successful employee for years, that's just another applicant. Judge them on the merits of how they're doing in their current job. You don't need to make special accommodations. Just don't exclude them because of a mistake for the past. It's also important to give real consideration. I would not exclude, even if you don't think you're ready to make the step, start taking a real look at what criminal background checks say. Don't automatically say no. Take a look at the circumstances. And very often you'll find that the overwhelming characteristic of people who got involved in the justice system were being young men. And we know neurologically, young men develop later. The shorthand I used to use for this is young men are stupid, and that's not meant to insult young men. I'm the father of them, and I'm not so old I don't remember the kind of missteps that you're vulnerable to at that age. So get to understand what's really part of a criminal record and what does it mean. We also have a long history in this country of overcharging. People are held on pretrial detention, they're arrested, they can't make bail, and they're very vulnerable to just plead guilty to this and you can go home. And very often that might mean accepting a felony charge that should have been a misdemeanor charge. There's a lot of issues here, and you really have to treat these people as individuals and look at their record individually. Connect with second chance pioneers, companies that are doing it. Learn from their experience. The book I wrote, of course, has many examples of second chance pioneers. I sort of profile about a half a dozen of them, and that's a great learning experience. But it's equally important to connect with nonprofit partners. I'm very pleased that our conversation will be with SWAG, the director of SWAG Inc., which is one such partner, and will offer opportunities. Go see what these community partners can do for you in helping be a talent pipeline or helping support your existing employees in ways that allow them to stay employed and stay engaged with your enterprise. And then even if you're not there yet, make sure you're not excluding second chance companies that are your vendors from performing their job. So you may not be ready to hire someone with a criminal record, but you shouldn't restrict someone who paints your building or does the landscaping. Very often, this is particularly true in the healthcare field, there are restrictions on who can even show up working for a vendor. That's really not fair, and very often it's important to make sure that these restrictions, which might have been written into procurement rules 20 years ago, get re-examined and make sure that we're not excluding progress of other companies, even if your own company is not doing this. And then one final one is offering amnesty. I think that this is really important. You may have someone on your payroll who's been a loyal employee for years or decades who has a criminal record long in their past that never came up in a question in an employment application, never showed up in a background check, but those employees live in fear that it will be revealed someday. This is something that has come up several times in my examination of this. People who worked for small companies that got acquired, those original companies didn't do background checks, didn't have a box on their application to check. They were just taken in, and yet the rules of the new company say they should be terminated, and have in some cases been terminated. So consider amnesty for any employee who has a criminal record that goes back many, many years ago, and if they've been with you and a good employee in other ways. There are some key resources here to look at. I'm a great fan of the work being done by SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management. SHRM has created a Getting Talent Back to Work, Getting Talent Back to Work certification. This is a organization, the largest HR professional organization in the world, with 300,000 members. They get paid from membership, and they get paid by certifications. They are so committed to fostering second chance employment that they have created a certification program that teaches a lot about this process, that is open to non-members. And also, there's no charge. So great work on their part. Dave's Killer Bread Foundation. Some of you are familiar with Dave's Killer Bread. It's a bakery based in Portland, Oregon. They supply wonderful bread products everywhere in the country. They're a second chance employer. They have a foundation. They created a playbook of videos that offer advice. Checker is a background check company, also a second chance employer, that has created a ebook, a Fair Chance Hiring Guide. I'd urge everyone to look at this last one. It'll only take you 30 seconds. Level Set is a consulting firm in this space. They have a fair chance hiring assessment. It's only 10 questions. It will take you 30 seconds to go through their questions about your hiring process. I don't agree with every direction they've taken here, but it's eye-opening, helps you understand the barriers that we are unwittingly putting into place that ultimately in this labor shortage hurt us as well. And then, of course, my book is available, and you'll learn more about that. So I think that's a good time to bring in my Naeem Al-Amin, who is the director of SWAG, and is going to chat with me about the book. Naeem, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about SWAG, because I think it's an important resource and organization. So yeah, like any author, I want to talk a lot about my book, but I also want to hear a little bit from you, and I'm sure our audience does as well.
Well, first, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today, serving as a moderator for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Author Series hosted by the Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. And again, my name is Naeem Al-Amin. I am the founder and CEO of SWAG Inc., or Serve, Witness, and Give Guidance. Inspiration never ceases. We are a nonprofit that believes once you get out of prison, you should stay out. We promote ownership for those impacted by mass incarceration. We do that by developing returning citizens, or those exiting prison, to become owners through education, employment etiquette, and entrepreneurship. We also work with employers to help change the way they recruit, shifting from talent acquisition to talent sourcing in order to help restore lives and bolster the economy. So in SWAG Inc.'s model, retention reduces recidivism. But Jeff, I'm ultimately someone who's been impacted by mass incarceration over 30 years, culminating in 3 prison experiences, which would inspire me to create a new business model in the mass incarceration space in pre-entry planning as a way to solve for the re-entry pandemic, or the process of re-entering the community after a prison experience. And so in our model, we work with our clients 1 year prior to release, and then 1 to 3 years in the community to help ensure that they discharge probation and parole. And this is facilitated under our curriculum, the HOPES program, Healing, Ownership, Planning, Employment, Sustainability. So I'm really excited and really grateful for the work that you do, advocating for people such as myself that represent that untapped talent pool, and also educating business community on why it makes sense to hire us.
It's really a great pleasure, and I think I'm helping the business community too. So
I would say so. And so I'm definitely excited again to work through some questions from your book, Untapped Talent, How Second Chance Hiring Works for Your Business and Community. And we actually had an opportunity to connect at a previous Kansas City Chamber event for the Workforce Opportunity on Returning Citizens, where you gave me an autographed copy of your book, and I promptly read it, by the way. So great work. And so the first question that I have for you is, while many think of government or nonprofits as conduits toward a more equitable society, you say that's a job for the business community. And how so, Jeff?
Well, it's not a job for the business community alone, but it has to include the business community. And the business community should also be stepping up and talking about policy and supporting organizations like yours that can help. The fundamental issue here is, if we want a safer society, you have to give people who have made a mistake and become justice involved, you have to give them the opportunity to rebuild their lives. And that means that employment is foundational to that. And the vast bulk of employers in this country are private businesses and for-profit businesses. So if that employment isn't there, we're not getting the societal job done. So it has to include the business community.
Absolutely. And we do find that employment is essential to that Maslow hierarchy of needs. And so really appreciate that. Well, what makes you think people in the business community are ready for this conversation now, Jeff?
So I'm actually incredibly encouraged by what I see going on. First of all, the labor shortage is forcing businesses, whether they want to go in this direction or not, it's forcing them to consider this. I hope they'll consider it the right way, not lowering standards, just a different kind of talent pool, but it's forcing them to be open to it. It's also become something that has been recognized by some of the top leaders in the business community. There's something called the Second Chance Business Coalition that was started. It's about 30 name brand US companies. It's co-chaired by Craig Arnold at Eaton Corporation, a publicly traded power management company based in Cleveland, and by Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO and chairman of JP Morgan, the nation's largest bank. And it's not just lip service. These companies are second chance employers or committing to actually doing pilot programs and sharing data. So this is a very real initiative in the business community at a time when the business community is open to doing this. And that's something that is truly new for us in our society today.
So great answer. And so what does a banker have to do with hiring people that have impacted?
So banks, as many of you know, are heavily regulated and have a lot of regulatory barriers that mean we can't hire people, but we can hire some. And but I think fundamentally this is about helping our customers, the companies we bank, find the labor they need and making our communities better. So the combination of helping our customers and improving our communities, to me, seems like a pretty good role for a banker. And then I've also undertaken, and I should add, the book is an outside business activity, so my views do not necessarily represent the views of my employer, but obviously I've gotten a tremendous amount of support. But one of the things that I did recently, I guess this was the end of September now, I was asked to testify on Capitol Hill before the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee of the House Financial Services Committee, which oversees the financial industry, to talk about lowering barriers to employment in financial services. So there's a movement within the industry as well to hire.
Awesome, thank you, Jeff. And also, you've had conversations with hundreds of business owners about their thoughts around second chance hiring. What are the primary concerns about such a program?
Well, it boils down to three concerns. Number one, this concern of safety and liability, right? Am I endangering my customers or my workforce by hiring someone with a criminal record? And that would consequently open me up to legal liability, something called negligent hiring liability. That's a big one. You can address that. I'm not saying you have to hire everyone. You get to pick who you hire still. And it's just being open to finding people who have once made a mistake in their past. And we all know that there are absolutely toxic employees that don't have a criminal record too. So you can be open to all these problems when you hire anyone. And here I'd argue that you actually probably put in more due diligence, background checks, and really a more thorough process. So I don't think that you're really taking on excess liability or risk at all. And then the second one tends to be a fear that there's an association of people with criminal records can't be good employees. Very often this is because employers had this experience in the past where they, quote unquote, lowered their standards. Well, again, you don't go looking for talent, you won't find it. So you need a process to identify who is ready and who's going to be a good employee. The fact that someone had a criminal record doesn't mean you drop that process. So you can address quality. There's lots of great examples. In fact, every bit of studies and academic evidence of second chance employers suggests that you do it right, you get a superior work product, not an inferior one. And then the last one is one that objection is one that I think is pretty dated. It's this thought that you have reputational risk and you won't have customers or you'll lose customers because you're hiring people with criminal records. I think that's pretty old school. In the new world, we have lots of evidence that consumers want to do business with companies that are addressing societal problems. We know millennial and Gen Z employees want to work for companies that are involved in more than delivering profits to shareholders and are involved in fixing societal problems. This is a big problem. It's something that every company can be very proud to be involved in, and many consumers get this as well. You see, again, to go back to that Dave's Killer Bread, if you see their loaves in stores, every package proclaims that they are a proud second chance employer. They have billboards like that as well. So I think that reputational risk is really those concerns are fading quickly, and all these concerns should be addressed, but there are reasonable ways to address them.
Absolutely, Jeff. And if I could, I would like to share a synopsis of my story as it aligns with the benefits of hiring someone that's had felony impact or been to prison. And so I was recently released March 22nd, 2018, after serving a 5-year sentence for conspiracy to distribute cocaine. Because I didn't turn state evidence, I was charged with a crime that I didn't commit, and I served 5 years in prison. And that is where I wrote the business plan to Swag Inc. ultimately. And so I was released March 22nd, 2018, and I was given an opportunity by UPS. I was hired as a package handler, and I was promoted to human resources within 4 months. And at that time, I had been transversing through the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Kansas City, Missouri, and I had a working business plan. I submitted that to the C-suite of UPS as I was now in that hierarchy. They saw value in that, allowed me to work autonomously, co-brand UPS and Swag Inc., and hire people that had that impact through felony convictions. And what we were able to do was an increase in retention over 70%, increase in attendance by 50%, and 0% recidivism from the people we were able to hire.
And kudos to UPS also. I was on a panel with one of their senior legal people in Atlanta, and they talked about, they went into their HR process and their HR rules and realized that they had built in all these unnecessary exclusions over the year. One bad employee, they said, oh, we better write a rule for that. And there was this, like regulatory creep inside their company. And they made a definite, a conscious and very successful effort to get that out of there. And that's helped their company be able to grow and prosper because they can find the employees they need.
Absolutely. UPS was definitely a good omen on the path laden with adversities in my life. Moving on to the next question. What does it mean to be labeled a criminal in our society today? And is there anything we can objectively conclude from such a label?
This is a terrible tragedy. I think of America as the land of second chances. You get the chance to rebuild and remake yourself. And that's been so much of our history. Yet if you have a criminal record, you get thought of as a criminal or a felon. I mean, the worst is, right, someone who had a felony conviction at age 18, so minor that it didn't even require a prison term. I know a woman charged with a felony for 2 fake IDs while she was trying to get a drink underage in New York City, an overcharge situation. These people are considered felons for life, right? 30 years later, you're still considered a felon. There's something that is just absolutely un-American about that. And we have this terrible stigma instead of just saying, oh, someone who made a mistake, right? I would not like to be known as, if you have a criminal record, you're known as someone with a criminal record the rest of your life. I may have been a drunk, stupid 20-year-old, but I don't want to be called the person who used to be a drunk, stupid 20-year-old, the rest of my life. So this is something that's really unfair. I think we're getting better at it. I saw, for instance, Sesame Street as a new character who has a parent who's incarcerated. This is just part of life here. It doesn't mean you condone criminal acts, but it means that you recognize that people are not defined by that. And so we have more societal work to do on this. But I think that if we start finding that we have valued co-workers and friends who have criminal records, you start chipping away at that stigma. I know my personal experience has been, I went into this, 8 years ago, not really knowing anyone who had a criminal record. And now I am, I'm blessed with many, many friends who this happened to be part of their life experience. And my life has been enriched by their friendship and and some are colleagues and in this work. So that stigma is a bad thing. Yes, it hurts the people who have the criminal record, but it also hurts people like us who don't get to enjoy the benefits of meeting people with diverse backgrounds.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. It leads me to a statement and a question. And so that was part of the thing that I experienced, having that criminal stigma over me. And so during my second prison experience, which was for possession of marijuana with intent to sell, I decided to pursue education as a way to change my life and trend in upward social mobility. And so I did that upon release. I went to Kansas State University. I obtained 2 bachelors of science and an associate's degree. And, over a 3-year time frame, I wasn't able to receive employment, not because under the traditional talent acquisition model of expression of interest, hiring, onboarding, training, retention, that I would be a good fit. It was that I had a felony conviction for marijuana. And that would ultimately set me up to revert back to a scarcity mindset and start back selling drugs and be in a position to be associated with someone under investigation. And so really thankful that you laid that out. And the question I have for you, are there any policies we should be aware of as it relates to this?
So one of the things that I've argued is that the policies that there are some policies, a lot of this just has to come from the business community, but the business community should step up and be part of the policy debate, because there are policies some policies are more productive, and those that focus on employment outcomes I think and that includes not just helping the person with a criminal record, but helping the employer as well. So I mentioned this concern about negligent hiring liability and the risk to HR professionals in hiring someone with a criminal record. Well, one of the ways to get rid of that issue, both the negligent hiring liability and the decision-making of HR that's unfair against their career aspirations, is to eliminate that visibility of the criminal record. So I recently had an article in The Hill, the Washington publication, that talked about a body of legislation that's moving through the states, including the state of Kansas is considering this as well, called clean slate legislation. It takes people who have been convicted of minor crimes. Most legislation, I don't know the Kansas legislation specifically, but most of these only cover people who had misdemeanors and then have had a period of time pass with no subsequent arrest. So this is someone who made a mistake and has kind of proven over 5 years or 7 years, depending on the misdemeanor, that they are not an inherently criminal person, whatever that means, but it's a good sign of rehabilitation, and it seals those records. They don't show up in background checks. They are not visible to employers. Now, from a public safety standpoint, there's the benefit of greater employability, but also these records are sealed, but they are visible typically to law enforcement should they need them. So it's not sacrificing public safety to do this. It's simply helping employers and employees meet together and create gainful employment. So clean slate legislation, automated expungement for very specific low-level crimes. You can't have committed 5 misdemeanors and get this, but it is a starting point, and it's good legislation. There's other solutions that prohibit negligent hiring liability for employers in certain areas. All these things are taking concerns off of the table that can help foster better outcomes.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And also equally important to note, the Kansas City Chamber of Commerce is a part of that Clean State initiative. And we're truly grateful to be a partner under their workforce opportunity for returning citizens as an organization. And if you will, though the list of services that help maintain employment is daunting, employers in most cases need not furnish them directly. So who does, Jeff?
So this is a really interesting point. I tell employers that you've got to make accommodations or make investments for this to tap this talent pool. And I think the initial response is, oh, I got to spend money. This is going to be crazy. But employers do this all the time. I like to use the example of McDonald's Corporation, which moved their headquarters from a suburb of Chicago into the city of Chicago. They did so explicitly to chase talent. They felt this is where you could get young professionals. It was kind of a foodie culture in that part of the city as well. That building cost them $200 million to build, plus the moving costs, right? That was a talent acquisition investment.
Wow.
This is a talent acquisition investment that sometimes is no cost, flex time for someone to meet a parole officer, for instance, or offering a meeting space on your place of employment for parole officers to come, particularly if you have multiple people who for whom that parole officer has clients who are in your employ. But there's also all these other investments that you have community partners. People who can help with transportation, they can help with housing needs. You need, as an employer, to understand and build a relationship with your employees that there may be needs you're not used to addressing and be able to help them, point them in the right direction. Some companies do invest in life coaches and things like that, but just having an educated HR professional and an educated manager. There's a company in Western Michigan that offers all their supervisors the opportunity to participate in a poverty simulation. So they understand the kind of things, a car breaks down. What does that mean if you're living on the edge? It's different than, I pull out the credit card and call AAA and call a Lyft or Uber. If you don't have money in the bank, you don't have a bank account, you don't have credit, a $300 car repair can be something that knocks you out of the workforce unless your employer understands where you're coming from and can help work with you. So these, there are lots of nonprofits that can support this. There are government entities that can support this, not just with things like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, but say transportation authorities. I know the Atlanta Transportation Authority, the Atlanta Transit Authority, actually moved a bus route to facilitate the employees of a second chance employer. They allowed, this employer found that their employees were having trouble getting to work because they weren't well served by the bus system from where they lived to where they worked. They went to the transit authority, and to the transit authority's credit, they actually changed the bus route to facilitate this kind of employment. So you have all sorts of resources in tackling this talent pool.
Wow. Thank you, Jeff. And so what we're able to do as Swag Inc. is provide that in the conversations with our employment partners, what that continuum of care looks like through our HOPES program, where we're partnered with the KC Chamber of Commerce, and we can offer things like mental health, through Sam Rogers. We can offer transportation through a partnership with Enterprise. We also bring in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as well as mentors and a support group to help our clients heal and their support systems from a prison experience as a family member or a returning citizen, as well as a Hustle 2.0 curriculum that offers 12 evidentiary-based programming that equate to emotional intelligence upon completion. And so we believe that this will help our clients / employees over that retention period of 6 months as we work with our employment partners.
And so I think this is also where involving people who have the lived experience is so important, because they understand all the needs, right? And that's right. And that's so when you understand the needs, you can address the needs.
Absolutely.
Great pathways.
So great point. And since we are talking about the Department of Corrections, our incarceration, and to the business community and nonprofits, would you speak to Zephyr Incorporated and how they're able to work within the Department of Corrections setting?
So this is really interesting. And I want to stress the term prison labor has all sorts of weights on it, and that can mean different things to different people. But there is, in the state of Kansas, goes back 30 or 40 years, there is a work release program that allows people to leave the prison gates daily, board a bus, pay bus fare, go to a place of employment, and work and get paid prevailing wages, reasonable wages, while they're getting skills, and then they get on the bus and they go back to the facility. Zephyr Inc. is one of these private sector companies that have been doing this. There is nothing exploitative about this. This is a labor force that walks away. Typically, the average employee is with them, I think, 3.5 years, and walks away with something like $5,000 in the bank, and often welding certifications and a real career opportunity. So Kansas has done a good job in creating models for this. There's a handful of companies that do this. Zephyr is, I believe, the largest and the longest established here. But we have to be very careful in identifying employment opportunities that can come before release. And again, I'm not talking about anything exploitative here. There's other training programs. For those who get the book, I often urge people, start with Chapter 6. It's a case study of a company called JBM Packaging. And they came to Second Chance Employment, they call it Fair Chance Employment, not because they had some social motivation. They came to it because they couldn't find labor anywhere else. And it turned into such a successful model. They hired a life coach for the employees. It has allowed them to grow and prosper. And one of the ways they've grown and prospered is by setting up a training program within an Ohio state prison. They actually had an employee who had made a mistake, was incarcerated. They worked with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, the prison authority, had that individual transferred to a prison that had good HVAC system. They donated they're an envelope company, a folding machine, and they have a paid training program. They actually don't sell anything made there. They don't want to be involved in producing product in prison. They recycle the envelopes that are made there as part of their training program. And this company has now created a pipeline of people who are already trained on their machines, have been trained a little bit on their corporate culture. It's been so successful that this company, which was about an hour outside of Cincinnati in a small county seat, opened a new facility. They opened it in inner city Cincinnati. Wow. Because they recognize that's where their talent pool is. When's the last time a manufacturing company went into the hood to build a facility and employ local talent? But once you understand how it can be done right and you get your system down, it's a very, very viable business proposition.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. And that's a perfect opportunity to kind of highlight what we're doing with J.E. Dunn Construction, as we're still currently going through work sessions. But what we're doing is introducing the industry leading standard in the construction, craft, and trades as it relates to an apprenticeship model and creating employment opportunities after release. And so we're really excited to be embarking on that. And I will have one last question before we start taking questions from the audience, as we have a robust amount of questions for you. And my last question is, most businesses that have to date taken up second chance programs are privately owned, small to mid-size companies. Why do you believe that is, Jeff?
It's because they are often not the employee of choice, right? If you ask a lot of college graduates, who do you want to work for? I want to work for Google or Facebook or Amazon. And people don't always think of the local companies. So there's often they are feeling the labor shortage more. But I'll also say it's something about the leadership of these companies. Often these are multi-generational companies that have deep roots in their community, and they understand that this is an opportunity to make their community better. It is spreading to large companies. Some large companies do it and won't admit to it for reputational risk or perceived reputational risk. But I think the real leadership here has been mid-sized privately owned companies, because their leadership is so tightly interwoven with the community. They don't think a solution is to go open a plant, in China or whatever. They think the solution is to work within their community and build their community up as well.
Again, thank you, Jeff, for that robust answer. And I will be going to the audience for questions now. And so our first question is from Christina. Do you think the labor shortage, coupled with the pandemic and lack of interest from employees to return to the office, will lead employers to implement AI technology to replace humans for cognitively redundant roles? And
So-
how do you,
Okay, go ahead.
a little more to it, cognitively redundant roles, and how do you see virtual reality and the exponentially changing landscape of technology impacting marginalized communities over the next decades?
Okay, you're talking to an old guy who's not that cutting edge on technology, so but I will say, and this is it's interesting because I just spoke at the board meeting for my own employer, and you know, we're a company that employs 20,000 odd people, and we were talking about the investments companies are making to deal with the labor shortage and ways to change their process. And you know, we see this right at our own level. You call in. How often do you call into a helpline or something like that, and you don't talk directly to a human being? If you ever talk to a human being, you got to answer 5 questions, and you're told about the website and all. Those are all things to get away with, to get around a labor shortage. But what I will say is, you can't completely replace human beings, and in fact, there's a real limit. I spoke to, I do these CEO roundtables in different cities, and I remember I was in Toledo pre-pandemic, and we were already feeling the labor shortage. And one of the CEOs at the table told this guy in the auto manufacturing, he said, you know, why don't you just employ more robots? He said, yeah, I already have robots, but I could replace my 30 openings with 10 robots, but then I'm going to need 5 highly trained technicians to take care of the robots. And those are even harder to find, those 5, than the 30 openings. And so, you know, there's some limits to this. What I would say is that I don't worry about that. The track record is that technology ultimately allows people to be more productive and to allow us to hire more people at higher wages. It does require different training programs, particularly those in prison, and in different use of our educational system that's got to be a little bit more attuned to this. But it is coming. Businesses are making investments to work around or work with the labor shortage, but there is such a deep embedded labor shortage, it doesn't mean it's going to fix the problem. We still, in the business community, have to look at non-traditional hires like people with criminal records.
Wow, thank you. And our next question, I hope that satisfied your question, Christina. I'm sorry. Our next question coming from Sari. I hope I pronounced that right. Sari Maple. Would it be possible to get a list of the job titles the city of Philadelphia filled with this population?
So this is, I will tell you, I don't have that, and it's not the city. It was a specific employer. It's Brown Superstores, and it started absolutely with entry level, but people are working into management. So there are people at probably hasn't been enough time for people at the most senior ranks to get up, but people are moving through the ranks in his stores, and so it's not just entry level. It's people at manager level and things like that who've come out, and they're upping their training game as well. So there is, I look forward to the day when we have more CEOs who have criminal records and more board members who have criminal records. We need to get there. It's going to take time to get there. And it's really important that we encourage those companies that have taken any kind of step in this direction, that we encourage them and not let perfection be in the way of progress.
Wow, well said. Moving on to our next question from Sunita Lavin. Again, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Forgive me if I didn't. What suggestions do you have for consulting businesses where we need to ensure our clients are okay with second chance folks? How can we sell this idea to clients?
I think it depends. Are you saying, is the question about having consultants, people who are part of your consulting firm with criminal records? I'm not sure it's always their business. I don't, if I work with clients, my background is, they don't need to know my health. They don't need to know my marital status, that kind of thing. As long as the company stands behind this. I do understand that many consulting firms have automatic no hire or automatic termination provisions. I actually have a friend who works for a globally recognized consulting firm. He had a felony conviction 30 years ago and was incarcerated for a few years. He lives in fear every day, and he's very successful, multiple six-figure income, been a contributor to this company for 20 years, and he lives in fear. So they can do the job, but I understand that these are barriers in terms of selling companies on the concept themselves. I think the labor shortage is going a long way already towards opening people up, but the message has to be very clear. It is viable, but you have to do it the right way. Treat it like a talent pool, not like you're lowering your standards. And it does require an education process. It requires intentionality. It requires more than just saying, oh yeah, we give everyone a fair chance. You really have to dig into your process and make sure you're doing it the right way. And that's frankly why I wrote the book, was to provide a resource that can help along that path.
Wow, and thank you for that authorship. Moving on to our next question is from Shauna Swartley. Please forgive if this was addressed earlier. I joined late. Are there any organizations that could act as an in-between where individuals could earn votes of confidence and prove their willingness to work hard and show up before putting anyone into a position where there could be significant liability? I love the idea of giving second chances, but in a healthcare environment, we must be extremely cautious.
Sure. So this is a big challenge. One of the things that we've seen work is temp staffing. Is one way to do it. It's not completely getting around it, but it gives employers an opportunity to get a look at a potential employees. Temp to hire kind of staffing often doesn't work because particularly in a tight labor market, you would think that, oh, every good candidate has already found permanent employment. Why are people going to temping? But what we found is because of the barriers to hiring people with criminal records, very often you find absolutely great employees who are forced to use temp, to go to temp agencies and do that kind of employment, and you can find them. So a number of employers do that. There's also things like organizations like the Center for Employment Opportunities. I don't know if they're in the Kansas City area, but they're in multiple locations around the country. They offer transitional employment, and there are other kinds of companies or agencies that will hire people for 3 months or 6 months, and and while they're often working on sort of workforce development issues, broad issues, they also will give report cards and be an intermediary and say, this person's ready, this person's not ready. It's really important when you're working with intermediaries to set expectations and make sure that if you're relying on an intermediary, they're sending over the person who's truly ready, and you have an honest assessment, not just the person who's in greatest need. That's often an instinct with many social service agencies. But I also want to address healthcare, because this is a big employer in our country and a big growing employer. There is a publication out there, you can find it. It's a joint publication of the National Employment Law Project, NELP, and Safer Foundation in Chicago. And it is a hiring guide for healthcare companies. And it is very interesting because there is this instinct to worry about healthcare setting, and it's very legitimate in certain settings as well. But there are also very notable healthcare companies. The Johns Hopkins hospital system has long been a second chance employer, and they've actually studied it. When they got to their first 500 second chance employees, they published some research that showed that, of course, not every one of 500 employees works out, but that they were on average more engaged and more loyal than typical workers. And while I believe at the time, like 70 or 80 of them did not stay employed there were, and this was important, there were no problematic terminations, right? That's what we really care about. We know not every employee is going to work out. Things happen. What you want to avoid are problematic terminations. And they found that there were none among 500, which is actually quite a good statistic. There are, I know I've worked with it, I can use this name because they've been public about a Spectrum Health system in Michigan, and I believe the largest health system in Michigan. They have a second chance hiring initiative. So it is possible, even in the healthcare arena, you do have some special considerations. But I will tell you, all too often, health systems or health companies are overly excluding people. There's a very prominent one. I don't want to mention the name, but it's a nationally recognized hospital system that we'd all say, oh, what a great system. They won't let a second chance employer that does like maintenance work on equipment or takes out old equipment and refurbishes it and resells it. And they've got a great workforce that includes about a quarter second chance hires, people with criminal records. They won't even let them on site. They say, well, you can come in and do your work, but we don't want anyone who has a criminal record. And the CEO of this second chance employer said to the CEO of this nationally recognized hospital system, he said, who do you think is walking the hallways of your hospital visiting patients? Do you do background checks for people who are, walking through the hallways? And because you will have lots of people with criminal records, you'll have lots of patients with criminal records. The difference is, as the CEO said, I'm vouching for these. I am responsible for them. So you have protection because I have a rigorous process, years of experience, and stand behind their work. So, it is more doable than you think, but absolutely a legitimate question. I'd urge you to take a look at that NELP publication as well. If you have trouble finding it, please reach out to the Kansas City Chamber and I'll find it's free. It's available online.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for that very passionate answer. Really, really thank you for that. And it appears that the last question that I see on my screen is for me, and it's from Christina. And the question is, congratulations and thank you for sharing your story with us. What do you contribute your success and ability to earn your education to after serving time? Was it a strong support system, family, or pure determination? Thank you. Christina, what a wonderful question and opportunity to elaborate on my story a little more. And so for me, it was about ownership. I was someone that was born into dysfunction, trauma, poverty, and my pathway to incarceration would come through the vehicle of foster care. And so it was pure determination, resiliency, and has always been that way. I've always felt that I've had something of value, something to offer. It was just getting to a point of ownership and then having a plan to act that out with. So thank you for an amazing question, Christina. And Greg, do you have any questions from your vantage point?
No, thank you, Naeem and Jeff. That was wonderful. Actually, if you guys have last parting words, we'd love to hear them right now.
Well, I'll just say that the labor shortage isn't going away. We in the business community can help ourselves, help our businesses, help our communities. But remember, you do it a step at a time. It can be a daunting task, but it's absolutely doable. There are a host of companies that have already done this and have figured this out. We can learn their lessons, and it is absolutely worth doing.
Thank you. Naeem?
Thank you, Greg. Just want to say that it's an honor and a privilege to be here today, acting as a moderator for the Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, working with Jeff. I'm just excited for the work that's to be done in the space with mass incarceration, to have the support of the chamber, to be able to partner with other community members, and I'm just excited about what the future looks like for KCMO. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm sure that if we were live and in person, you guys would finish this with the thunderous applause. Thank you so much for your work, Jeff, on this, and for promoting and advocating for this great issue and hopefully problem that we can solve here with your book and with examples like Naeem, and what great leaders we can get out of that system. So with that, we'd like to end our session. Thank you again, Commerce, for hosting and for sponsoring this sessions. Without your generosity, we couldn't do nothing like this. So look for more content like this in the next few months throughout the year. And thank you to all of our sponsors that we had on the screen earlier. Again, without our sponsors, we cannot put on things like this that are free. So on behalf of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you.